Hi, my name is Natalie Rodriguez, and this year my sister Victoria destroyed what she thought was my only chance at graduate school by sending a fake email canceling my scholarship interview. What she didn't know was that the dean conducting those interviews was my husband Marcus, and he had been quietly documenting her sabotage attempts for months. But that wasn't even the most shocking part. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The real betrayal came when I discovered she had been systematically undermining my achievements since high school, convincing our parents that every success I earned was somehow undeserved. I never imagined that justice would come in the form of a recorded phone call and a stack of printed emails. But sometimes the truth reveals itself in the most unexpected ways. The desert heat in Phoenix was unforgiving that Tuesday morning in late April, the kind that makes the asphalt shimmer like water and sends everyone rushing between air-conditioned buildings. I stood outside the Southwest State University Administration Building, clutching a leather portfolio that contained 3 years of research proposals, recommendation letters, and the application for the Martinez Memorial Scholarship that could change everything. The scholarship wasn't just money, though the full tuition coverage and research stipend would mean I could finally pursue my master's in environmental engineering without drowning in debt. It represented validation, proof that a girl from a working-class Mexican-American family could make it in a field dominated by people who had never worried about choosing between textbooks and groceries. I had been dreaming about this moment since my sophomore year of college when Professor Miller first mentioned the scholarship during an advanced physics class, named after Delena Martinez, the first Latina to earn a PhD in environmental engineering from Southwest State. The scholarship was awarded annually to one exceptional student who demonstrated both academic excellence and a commitment to environmental justice in underserved communities. The application process was rigorous, requiring not just stellar grades and test scores, but a comprehensive research proposal and a panel interview with university administrators and faculty. The morning air already carried hints of the scorching day ahead, but inside the administration building, the temperature was perfectly controlled, almost cold against my skin. I had chosen my outfit carefully, a navy blazer over a white blouse and charcoal slacks, professional but not pretentious. My long black hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and I wore the small silver earrings my grandmother had given me for luck. In my purse I carried a printed copy of my research proposal on sustainable water management systems for desert communities, along with backup copies of every document, because growing up in a family where important papers had a way of disappearing had taught me to always have redundancy. The scholarship interview was scheduled for 10 in the morning, and I had arrived 15 minutes early, a habit ingrained by years of watching my father leave for construction sites before dawn. Eduardo Rodriguez had built his small company through reliability and attention to detail, values he had passed down to both his daughters, though Victoria seemed to have inherited only the attention to detail part, using it for purposes our father never intended. As I sat in the waiting area watching other students hurry past with their backpacks and coffee cups, I thought about the path that had brought me here. 4 years earlier I had started college as an undeclared major, unsure if I belonged in higher education at all. My parents had been supportive but cautious, having never attended college themselves. Victoria, 3 years older and already established in her career as a marketing coordinator for a tech startup, had been vocal about her skepticism. She questioned whether I was cut out for the academic pressure, suggested that maybe I should consider something more practical, like joining Dad's construction business or getting a certificate in medical administration. But something had clicked during my first environmental science course. Learning about water scarcity, renewable energy, and climate change impacts on vulnerable communities felt like discovering my purpose. I changed my major to environmental engineering and threw myself into my studies with an intensity that surprised everyone, including myself. My grades climbed steadily from B's to A's, and by junior year I was conducting independent research with Professor Miller on solar-powered water purification systems. The research had grown into something bigger than either of us had initially envisioned. Working with community organizations in South Phoenix, I had helped design and implement pilot programs that brought clean water access to families living in areas where aging infrastructure and contaminated wells posed serious health risks. The work was meaningful in a way that made long hours in the lab feel effortless, and it had caught the attention of several faculty members who encouraged me to apply for graduate school. That's when Victoria's subtle sabotage had begun, though I hadn't recognized it as sabotage at the time. It started with small comments during family gatherings, observations that seemed supportive on the surface, but carried an undercurrent of doubt. She would mention how competitive graduate programs were, how many qualified applicants got rejected, how expensive advanced degrees could be even with funding. When I received my GRE scores well above the 90th percentile in both sections, she congratulated me while noting that test scores weren't everything, that admissions committees looked at the whole package. The comments escalated when I started preparing my scholarship application. Victoria volunteered to help with proofreading, a gesture that seemed generous until I noticed that her suggestions consistently involved scaling back my ambitions. She recommended removing details about my community work, arguing that it might seem unfocused. She questioned whether my research proposal was too ambitious for someone without graduate-level experience. She even suggested that I might want to consider less competitive scholarships, ones with lower visibility and smaller awards. I had dismissed her concerns as well-meaning sisterly worry, the kind of protective instinct that comes from caring about someone's potential for disappointment. Our family dynamics had always been complicated when it came to achievement. Victoria had been the academic standout in high school, earning admission to Arizona State University and graduating with honors in business administration. She had landed her first job before graduation and seemed to have her career trajectory mapped out with precision. I was the late bloomer, the one who had struggled with math in elementary school and hadn't found her academic rhythm until college, but there had been signs that Victoria's protectiveness masked something dark. During my senior year of high school, when I was applying to colleges, several of my application deadlines had somehow been missed despite my careful organization. Forms I was certain I had submitted were found incomplete in the system. My SAT registration for the October test date had mysteriously been canceled, forcing me to take the exam in December and submit applications with scores that arrived just under the wire. At the time, these incidents had seemed like unfortunate coincidences, the kind of bureaucratic mix-ups that plague stressed high school seniors. Victoria had been particularly helpful during that period, offering to review my applications and even volunteering to handle some of the more tedious paperwork. I remembered feeling grateful for her support, especially since our parents were overwhelmed with managing the construction business and navigating the complexities of college applications in a language that wasn't their first. It wasn't until years later that I began to recognize the pattern, the way problems seemed to arise just after Victoria had offered to help with something important. The scholarship application process had followed a similar trajectory. Victoria had insisted on reviewing my personal statement, spending weeks providing feedback that gradually stripped away the passion and specificity that made my story compelling. She convinced me to remove anecdotes about overcoming financial hardship, arguing that admissions committees might view them as playing the victim card. She questioned whether I should mention my parents' immigration story, suggesting that it might seem like I was relying on identity rather than merit. By the time I submitted my final application, the personal statement felt sanitized, generic, like it could have been written by any competent student, rather than someone whose life experiences had shaped their commitment to environmental justice. I had felt uneasy about the changes but trusted Victoria's judgment, reasoning that she had more experience with professional writing and understood what selection committees wanted to see. The interview invitation had arrived via email 3 weeks earlier, and I had stared at the screen for several minutes before the reality sank in. Out of over 200 applicants, I was one of only 12 students selected for the final round. The email provided detailed instructions about the interview format, the parking arrangements, and the documentation I would need to bring. It also included a reminder that interviews were conducted by a panel including the Dean of Engineering, Dr. Marcus Thompson, along with faculty members and previous scholarship recipients. I had forwarded the email to my family immediately, unable to contain my excitement. My parents' response had been effusive. My mother Carmen calling within minutes to congratulate me in rapid-fire Spanish punctuated by tears of joy. My father had been characteristically reserved but proud, mentioning the interview to his crew and joking that his daughter was going to be Dr. Rodriguez someday. Victoria's response had been more measured, a brief congratulations, followed by practical questions about what I would do if I didn't get the scholarship. whether I had backup plans, and reminders about the importance of managing expectations. As I sat in the administration building waiting area, reviewing my notes one final time, I felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement that reminded me why I had fallen in love with learning in the first place. The research proposal I carried represented months of work, late nights in the library, weekends spent analyzing data and refining hypotheses. It was ambitious, proposing a comprehensive study of decentralized water treatment systems that could be implemented in rural desert communities throughout the Southwest. The project would require significant funding and access to specialized equipment, but it also had the potential to impact thousands of families who currently lacked reliable access to clean water. My phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus, my husband of 2 years, whom I had met during my junior year when he was completing his PhD in environmental policy. We had kept our relationship private during his graduate studies to avoid any appearance of impropriety, since he occasionally served as a teaching assistant in courses I was taking. After he completed his dissertation and accepted a position as an administrator at Southwest State, we had been able to be more open about our relationship, though we were still careful to maintain professional boundaries when our academic and professional lives intersect. Marcus's text was brief but encouraging. "You've got this. Remember to breathe and trust your preparation. See you tonight for celebration dinner regardless of outcome." I smiled, tucking the phone back into my purse. Marcus had been my biggest supporter throughout the scholarship application process, helping me practice interview questions and providing feedback on my research proposal. His perspective as someone who understood both the academic and administrative sides of the university had been invaluable, though he had been careful not to provide any inside information that might compromise the integrity of the selection process. The waiting area was beginning to fill with other scholarship candidates, and I recognized a few faces from advanced courses and research presentations. There was David Park, whose work on renewable energy storage had earned recognition at the undergraduate research symposium. Sarah Williams was there too, the student whose project on urban air quality monitoring had been featured in the campus newspaper. Seeing the caliber of competition should have been intimidating, but instead it felt validating to be included among such accomplished students. A woman in her 50s emerged from the interview room, and I recognized her as Dr. Patricia Hernandez, the previous year's scholarship recipient, who was now pursuing her PhD while working part-time as a research assistant. She looked composed but slightly drained, the way people look after intense academic presentations. She nodded encouragingly at those of us still waiting before heading toward the exit. The administrative assistant, Diana Price, appeared with a clipboard and called out Natalie Rodriguez in a clear, professional voice. I stood up, smoothing my blazer and gathering my materials. As I walked toward the interview room, I felt a surge of confidence that surprised me. All the preparation, the late nights, the revisions and practice sessions, had led to this moment. Whatever happened in the next hour, I was ready. The interview room was smaller than I had expected, with a long conference table surrounded by 6 chairs. 4 people were already seated, and I recognized Dr. Marcus Thompson immediately, though I was careful to maintain the same professional demeanor I would show any other administrator. He was wearing a dark gray suit with a blue tie, his expression serious but not unfriendly. Beside him sat Professor Miller, who gave me a subtle encouraging nod, and 2 other faculty members I recognized from department meetings and research presentations. Dr. Thompson gestured to the chair across from the panel. "Ms. Rodriguez, please have a seat. We appreciate you taking the time to meet with us today." His voice was formal, betraying none of the warmth I was accustomed to hearing at home. "We've reviewed your application materials, and we're impressed by your academic record and research proposal. This interview gives us an opportunity to learn more about your motivations and goals." The next 45 minutes passed in a blur of questions about my research methodology, my long-term career objectives, and my commitment to community engagement. I found myself drawing on experiences from my childhood, describing how watching my father navigate the complexities of running a small business had taught me about problem-solving and persistence. I talked about the families I had worked with in South Phoenix, how their stories had shaped my understanding of environmental justice and motivated my desire to develop practical solutions that could be implemented at the community level. The panel's questions were thorough but not adversarial, and I felt increasingly confident as the interview progressed. When Professor Miller asked about the potential challenges of scaling my proposed research, I was able to discuss specific technical hurdles and outline strategies for addressing them. When Dr. Thompson inquired about my plans for disseminating research findings, I described my vision for working with community organizations and local government agencies to ensure that academic work translated into real-world impact. As the interview wound down, Dr. Thompson asked one final question that caught me slightly off guard. Ms. Rodriguez, can you think of a time when you faced significant obstacles or opposition in pursuing your academic goals? How did you handle that situation, and what did you learn from it? I paused for a moment, considering how to respond. The question seemed to invite a personal reflection, and I found myself thinking about the various challenges I had encountered along the way. Financial pressures, imposter syndrome, the occasional professor who seemed skeptical of my abilities, family members who questioned whether college was worth the investment. But as I formulated my response, something else came to mind, a pattern of incidents that I had never fully examined before. I think one of the most significant challenges I've faced, I began slowly, has been learning to trust my own judgment and capabilities when others have suggested that my goals might be unrealistic, or that I should consider less ambitious alternatives. There have been times when well-meaning people in my life have encouraged me to scale back my aspirations, to choose safer paths, or lower-stakes opportunities. I could see Dr. Thompson leaning forward slightly, his expression attentive. The most important lesson I've learned is that support doesn't always look the way you expect it to. Sometimes the people who claim to be looking out for your best interests are actually projecting their own fears or limitations onto your situation. Learning to distinguish between constructive feedback and discouragement, disguised as concern, has been crucial for my academic development. The panel members exchanged glances, and I had the sense that my answer had resonated in some way. Professor Miller nodded approvingly, and Thompson made a note on his evaluation form. "Thank you, Ms. Rodriguez, that's a very thoughtful response, and it speaks to the kind of self-awareness and resilience that we value in scholarship recipients." As I gathered my materials to leave, Dr. Thompson mentioned that scholarship decisions would be announced within 2 weeks, and that all candidates would be notified via email regardless of the outcome. I thanked the panel for their time and walked out of the interview room, feeling cautiously optimistic. The questions had been challenging but fair, and I felt that I had represented myself and my work well. The afternoon sun was blazing when I stepped outside the administration building, the heat hitting me like a physical wall after the air-conditioned interior. I walked slowly toward my car, replaying moments from the interview, and trying to assess how I had performed. Overall, I felt good about my responses, though I knew that the competition was fierce, and that academic merit was only one factor in scholarship decisions. My phone rang as I was unlocking my car, and I saw Victoria's name on the caller ID. "Hey Nat, how did the interview go?" Her voice was bright, cheerful, with an undertone of curiosity that seemed almost eager. "I think it went well," I replied, sliding into the driver's seat and starting the engine to get the air conditioning running. The panel asked good questions, and I felt prepared for most of them. "Now it's just a waiting game." "That's great. I'm sure you did amazing." Victoria's enthusiasm seemed genuine, but there was something in her tone that felt slightly off, like she was reading from a script. "So when do you find out about the results?" "They said within 2 weeks. All candidates get notified by email." I was buckling my seatbelt when Victoria's next comment made me pause. "Oh, that's interesting. I thought scholarship notifications usually came by regular mail for something this important. Email seems so impersonal." It was a strange observation, oddly specific for someone who had never applied for academic scholarships herself. "I guess they want to notify everyone quickly," I said, feeling a flicker of unease that I couldn't quite identify. "Email is pretty standard for this kind of thing." "Right, of course. Well, I'm keeping my fingers crossed for you. You've worked so hard for this." Victoria's voice carried that particular tone she used when she was being supportive in a way that somehow felt patronizing. "And hey, if it doesn't work out, there are always other opportunities, right? Maybe this just isn't the right time." I ended the call feeling unsettled, though I couldn't pinpoint exactly why. Victoria's comments had been encouraging on the surface, but they carried that familiar undercurrent of doubt, the suggestion that disappointment was not just possible but likely. It was the same tone she had used when I was applying to colleges, when I was changing my major, when I was preparing for graduate school applications, always supportive, always concerned, always ready with reminders about the challenges and potential setbacks. As I drove home through the Phoenix traffic, air conditioning blasting against the desert heat, I found myself thinking about Dr. Thompson's final question, and my response about learning to trust my own judgment. The conversation with Victoria had reminded me of how often I had second-guessed myself over the years, how frequently I had allowed other people's doubts to creep into my decision-making process, but today had been different. During the interview, I had felt confident and articulate, fully present in my own expertise and passion for the work. The research proposal I had presented was ambitious and well-conceived, the product of genuine curiosity and commitment rather than what I thought the committee wanted to hear. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had represented myself authentically, without the filter of other people's expectations or limitations. The scholarship notification would come when it came, and whatever the outcome, I knew I had given my best effort. As I pulled into the parking lot of my downtown Phoenix loft, I felt a sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with winning or losing. I had shown up fully as myself, and that felt like a victory worth celebrating regardless of what happened next. The notification email arrived on a Thursday morning exactly 12 days after my interview, and I almost deleted it thinking it was spam. The subject line read, "Scholarship Application Update, Action Required," which seemed oddly vague for something as significant as the Martinez Memorial Scholarship result. I was sitting in my favorite corner booth at the Daily Grind, a coffee shop near campus where I often studied between classes, when I opened the email on my laptop. "Dear Ms. Rodriguez, we regret to inform you that your scholarship interview scheduled for April 24th was canceled due to your failure to confirm attendance as required. As per our policy, candidates who do not respond to confirmation requests within 48 hours are automatically removed from consideration. We appreciate your initial interest in the Martinez Memorial Scholarship Program. Sincerely, Southwest State University Scholarship Committee." I stared at the screen, reading the message 3 times before the words began to make sense. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Cancelled interview. Failure to confirm. But I had attended the interview. I had sat in that conference room for 45 minutes answering questions about my research proposal and career goals. Dr. Thompson had shaken my hand afterward and told me that decisions would be announced within 2 weeks. The coffee shop around me continued its normal rhythm. Students typing on laptops, baristas calling out drink orders, the hiss of the espresso machine creating its familiar white noise. But I felt like I was watching it all from underwater, everything muffled and distorted. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone to call the university scholarship office. Diana Price answered on the 3rd ring, her voice professionally cheerful. "Southwest State Scholarship Office, this is Diana." "Hi, this is Natalie Rodriguez. I just received an email saying my scholarship interview was canceled, but I actually attended the interview on April 24th. There seems to be some kind of mistake." There was a pause, the sound of keyboard clicking. "Let me pull up your file, Miss Rodriguez. I see here that you were sent a confirmation request on April 22nd asking you to reply within 48 hours to secure your interview slot. We never received a response from you, so your appointment was given to an alternate candidate." "I never received any confirmation request," I said, my voice rising slightly. A few students at nearby tables glanced over. "I attended the interview. I spoke with Dr. Thompson and Professor Miller. There has to be a record of that." More keyboard clicking. A longer pause. "I'm not showing any record of your attendance at the April 24th interview session. The panel that day interviewed 11 candidates, and your name isn't on the attendance list. Are you certain about the date?" The room felt like it was tilting. "Yes, I'm absolutely certain. I have the original interview invitation email. I can forward it to you right now." Of course, please send that along and we'll investigate. Though I should mention that we did have an issue with fraudulent interview invitations earlier this semester. Some students received fake emails that appeared to be from our office. It's possible you may have been a victim of that scam. I hung up and immediately scrolled through my email to find the original interview invitation. It was there exactly as I remembered it, with the official university letterhead, and detailed instructions about parking and required documentation. I forwarded it to Diana Price, along with a detailed message explaining that I had definitely attended the interview, and requesting an immediate investigation. While I waited for a response, I called Marcus at his office. He answered on the first ring, his voice warm and familiar. "Hey beautiful, how's your day going?" "Marcus, something really strange is happening with the scholarship. I just got an email saying my interview was canceled because I didn't confirm attendance, but you know I was there. You interviewed." The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I started to wonder if the call had dropped. "Marcus, are you there?" "I'm here," he said, finally, his voice carefully neutral. "Natalie, I think there might be some confusion. I haven't conducted any scholarship interviews recently. The Martinez Memorial interviews aren't scheduled until next month." "What do you mean?" "My interview was April 24th. 12 days ago, you were there with Professor Miller and 2 other faculty members." My voice was getting louder again, and I stepped outside the coffee shop for privacy. "Natalie, I need you to listen to me carefully. The Martinez Memorial Scholarship interviews are scheduled for May 15th through 17th. I have the dates right here in my calendar. You couldn't have interviewed on April 24th, because the committee hasn't met yet." The Phoenix heat hit me like a physical blow as I stood on the sidewalk, phone pressed to my ear, trying to process what Marcus was telling me, but I was there. I sat in the conference room. I answered questions about my research proposal. "Where exactly did this interview take place?" "The administration building, 3rd floor conference room." Diana Price called my name from the waiting area. Another long pause. "Natalie, Diana Price is on vacation this week. She's been in Colorado visiting her daughter since Monday." The sidewalk seemed to shift beneath my feet. I leaned against the coffee shop's brick exterior wall, my free hand pressed to my forehead. This doesn't make sense. If Diana Price is on vacation, who did I just talk to on the phone? "I don't know, but I think you need to get down here right away. Something is very wrong." The drive to campus passed in a blur of confusion and growing anxiety. I kept replaying the interview in my mind, searching for details that might explain what was happening. The room, the questions, the faces of the panel members. Everything had seemed completely legitimate. Dr. Thompson had looked exactly like Marcus, down to the gray suit and blue tie he often wore to administrative meetings. But if Marcus said he hadn't interviewed me, then who had I been talking to? I found Marcus waiting in the lobby of the administration building, his expression serious and concerned. He wrapped me in a quick hug before leading me toward the elevators. "I've been making some calls since we talked. The 3rd floor conference room you described has been under renovation for the past month. It's been completely gutted." "That's impossible. I was just there 12 days ago." We rode the elevator in silence, and when the doors opened on the 3rd floor, I saw immediately that Marcus was right. The hallway smelled of fresh paint and construction dust. Plastic sheeting covered doorways, and the conference room where I thought I had interviewed was stripped down to bare walls and concrete floor. "I don't understand," I whispered, staring at the empty space. "This is where it happened. I'm not making this up." Marcus guided me to his office on the 2nd floor, closing the door behind us. "I believe that you experienced something, but it wasn't a legitimate scholarship interview. Someone went to a lot of trouble to create an elaborate deception." As we tried to piece together what had happened, my phone buzzed with a text message from Victoria. "Hey sis, just checking in. Any word on the scholarship yet?" I showed the message to Marcus, and something clicked in his expression. "Natalie, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Who knew the exact details of your interview? The date, time, location?" "Just family and a few close friends." I forwarded the interview invitation to my parents and Victoria right after I got it. Marcus was quiet for a moment, his fingers drumming against his desk. Have you noticed anything else unusual lately? Problems with applications, missed deadlines, computer issues? The question triggered a flood of memories I had been suppressing. Actually, yeah. During high school, there were several college application deadlines I somehow missed, even though I was sure I had submitted everything on time. And when I was applying for summer research programs last year, my application to the National Science Foundation program never went through even though I submitted it weeks before the deadline. Did Victoria help you with any of those applications? I felt something cold settle in my stomach. She helped with most of them. She's always been really good with details and organization. I trusted her to catch things I might have missed. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression troubled. I think we need to contact campus security and possibly the police. If someone is impersonating university officials and interfering with scholarship applications, that's fraud. It's also possible that whoever did this has access to your email and other personal information. While Marcus made calls to security, I sat in his office trying to reconstruct the timeline of events. The fake interview had been so convincing, so detailed, that whoever orchestrated it had intimate knowledge of the real scholarship program, the university's procedures, and my personal academic history. They had known exactly how to manipulate me, what questions to ask to make the experience feel authentic. The campus security officer who arrived 20 minutes later was a woman in her 40s named Detective Sarah Chen. She listened carefully as I described the fake interview, taking detailed notes, and asking specific questions about the people involved and the physical location. Ms. Rodriguez, I need to be direct with you. What you're describing sounds like an extremely sophisticated operation. Creating a fake scholarship interview, complete with impersonated officials, requires significant planning and resources. This wasn't a random prank. Someone targeted you specifically. She paused, consulting her notes. I'm also concerned about the email you received this morning, claiming your real interview was canceled. That suggests the perpetrator has ongoing access to information about the legitimate scholarship program and is actively trying to prevent you from participating. Marcus handed Detective Chen a printed copy of the fake interview invitation email. Is there any way to trace where this came from? We can try, but if someone is sophisticated enough to pull off what you've described, they probably used methods to mask their digital footprint. However, I'm more interested in the human element. Ms. Rodriguez, you mentioned that you shared the interview details with family members. I'd like to get contact information for everyone who knew about the scholarship. As I provided Detective Chen with contact information for my parents and Victoria, I felt a growing sense of dread. The evidence was pointing towards someone with intimate access to my life, someone who knew my schedule, my email habits, and my academic goals well enough to orchestrate this elaborate deception. Detective Chen asked me to forward her all emails related to the scholarship, including the original legitimate invitation and the fake cancellation notice I had received that morning. As I scrolled through my email to gather the messages, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The confirmation request email, I said slowly. The one Diana Price claimed they sent asking me to confirm my attendance. I never received it, but what if it was actually sent and someone intercepted? Marcus looked up from his own computer where he was checking the official scholarship timeline. That would explain how they knew to send you the fake cancellation notice with such specific details. Detective Chen nodded grimly. If someone has access to your email account, they could be monitoring all your correspondence and manipulating what you see. We need to change all your passwords immediately, and possibly move you to a new email address. The next 2 hours passed in a whirlwind of password changes, security questions, and forensic examination of my digital account. Detective Chen discovered that my email had indeed been accessed from an unknown IP address multiple times over the past 6 months. Always during hours when I was typically asleep or in class. Whoever is doing this has been watching your digital activity for months, she explained. They've been careful to cover their tracks, but we can see evidence of deleted emails and modified settings. They've essentially been curating what information reaches you. As the investigation continued, Marcus received a call from the Real Scholarship Committee coordinator, confirming that the Martinez Memorial interviews were indeed scheduled for the following month, and that my application was still active. However, the coordinator also mentioned something that sent another chill through me. She says they've received several calls over the past few weeks from someone claiming to be your sister, asking about interview schedules and procedures, Marcus reported after hanging up. The caller said she was helping you prepare and wanted to make sure she had all the correct information. Detective Chen looked up from her laptop. Ms. Rodriguez, I think we need to have a conversation with your sister Victoria. Based on what we've uncovered, she's either involved in this deception, or she's been impersonated as well. The idea that Victoria might be behind the fake interview felt surreal, like something from a psychological thriller rather than real life. We had grown up sharing a bedroom, surviving family camping trips and holiday dinners together. Yes, she had been critical of my academic pursuits, but sisters often were protective in counterproductive ways. The leap from discouraging comments to elaborate fraud seemed impossible. But as Detective Chen walked us through the evidence, the case against Victoria became increasingly compelling. She had access to my email passwords from years of helping with applications. She knew my schedule well enough to coordinate the fake interview for a time when I wouldn't have conflicting commitments. She understood the scholarship program's importance to me, and would have known that a convincing fake interview followed by a cancellation notice would be devastating. The psychological aspect is particularly concerning, Detective Chen explained. This type of sabotage often escalates over time. If your sister has been interfering with your academic opportunities for years, she may see your success as a threat to her own identity or family position. Marcus reached over and squeezed my hand. Whatever happens, we're going to get to the bottom of this, and we're going to make sure you get a fair shot at that scholarship. But even as he spoke the words, I could see the concern in his eyes. The fake interview had been just the beginning. If Victoria was really behind this, what other parts of my academic career had been manipulated without my knowledge? How many opportunities had I lost because someone I trusted was actively working against? Detective Chen recommended that we set up surveillance on my email and phone to catch Victoria in the act if she tried to interfere with the legitimate scholarship interview. She also suggested that I temporarily stay somewhere other than my apartment, in case Victoria had physical access to my living space as well. That evening, I sat in Marcus's kitchen while he made dinner, my laptop open to a fresh email account that Victoria didn't know about. We had spent the afternoon moving my important academic correspondence to the new address and setting up forwarding rules to catch any future interference. I keep thinking about all the times she volunteered to help with important applications, I said, watching Marcus chop vegetables for stir-fry. Every college application, every scholarship, every summer program. She was always so eager to proofread and double-check details. Marcus paused in his chopping. It's a perfect cover. She could make changes or sabotage deadlines while appearing to be the supportive older sister. But why? What does she gain from holding me back? I don't know, but we're going to find out. As if summoned by our conversation, my phone rang with Victoria's number. Marcus and I exchanged glances before I answered, putting the call on speaker so Detective Chen could listen in remotely. Natalie, I've been thinking about you all day. Any news on the scholarship? Her voice was bright and cheerful, exactly the tone she used when she was fishing for information. Not yet, I replied carefully. These things take time. Of course, of course. Well, I'm sure whatever happens, it's for the best. And hey, if it doesn't work out, I actually heard about this great program for first-generation college students. It's not as prestigious as the Martinez Scholarship, but it might be a better fit for someone with your background. There it was again, the subtle undermining disguised as helpful suggestion. But now, armed with the knowledge of what she had potentially done, her words felt like poison wrapped in sweet paper. Thanks for thinking of me, I said, my voice steady despite the anger building in my chest. I'll keep that in mind. After I hung up, Marcus and I sat in silence for several minutes. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling, and Victoria's behavior during the call had only reinforced our suspicions. Tomorrow we set the trap, Marcus said finally. Detective Chen has a plan to catch her in the act. The plan was elegantly simple. Detective Chen would send me a fake email about a scholarship opportunity with a tight deadline, but only Victoria would have access to the information needed to sabotage it. If my sister was really behind the interference, she wouldn't be able to resist the opportunity to strike again. As I fell asleep in Marcus's guest room that night, I thought about all the dreams I had deferred, all the opportunities I had assumed were lost to bad luck or my own inadequacy. If Victoria had really been sabotaging my academic career for years, then everything I thought I knew about my own capabilities and limitations was potentially wrong. But I also felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time: clarity. For the first time, the pattern of setbacks and near misses made sense. I wasn't unlucky or incompetent. I was being deliberately undermined by someone who was supposed to love and support me. The next morning brought unseasonably cool weather to Phoenix, cloud cover that provided relief from the relentless desert sun. I woke early and checked my email to find the fake scholarship opportunity Detective Chen had sent, complete with detailed application requirements and a deadline just 3 days away. I forwarded the email to Victoria with a message expressing excitement about this new opportunity and asking if she could help me review my application material. Her response came within 20 minutes, enthusiastically offering to assist and suggesting we meet that evening to work on the application together. As I prepared for what would likely be our final sisterly collaboration, I felt a mixture of sadness and anticipation. Part of me still hoped that the investigation would reveal some other explanation, that Victoria would turn out to be innocent and we could rebuild our relationship on a foundation of truth. But another part of me, the part that had been quietly suspicious for years, was ready for confirmation of what I had always sensed but never been able to prove. The fake scholarship interview had been elaborate and cruel, but it had also been a mistake. Victoria had finally overplayed her hand, and now the truth was going to come out, whether she wanted it to or not. The confrontation was scheduled for that evening, and Detective Chen would be monitoring everything remote. After years of subtle sabotage and elaborate deceptions, my sister was about to discover that some secrets are too big to keep buried forever. Victoria arrived at my apartment that evening, carrying a bottle of wine and a cheerful smile that didn't quite reach her eye. She had dressed casually in dark jeans and a flowing blouse, her long hair pulled back in a ponytail that made her look younger than her 27 years. As she hugged me at the door, I caught a whiff of her familiar perfume, the same vanilla and jasmine blend she had worn since college. "I brought celebration wine," she announced, holding up the bottle. "I figured we should toast your new opportunity whether we finish the application tonight or not." Detective Chen had briefed me extensively on how to behave normally while gathering evidence, but putting those instructions into practice felt surreal. This was my sister, the person who had taught me how to braid my hair and helped me practice driving in empty parking lots. The idea that she might be my saboteur still felt like something from a nightmare. "Thanks, Vic. That's really sweet of you." I led her into my living room, where I had spread out printed copies of the fake scholarship application materials Detective Chen had created. The documents looked authentic, complete with official letterhead from a fictional foundation, and detailed requirements that would appeal to someone with my academic background. Victoria set her purse down on my coffee table and immediately gravitated toward the papers, her eyes scanning the requirements with the focused intensity she brought to all academic documents. "Wow, this looks amazing. The Southwestern Environmental Leadership Fellowship. I've never heard of this foundation, but the funding amount is incredible." She picked up the application instructions, reading them carefully. I watched her face for any signs of recognition or suspicion, but her expression remained interested and supportive. Either she was an accomplished actress, or Detective Chen's fake scholarship was convincing enough to fool even someone who might be experienced in academic fraud. "The deadline is pretty tight," Victoria continued, settling onto my couch and crossing her legs. 3 days to put together a complete application package. "But you know what? I think we can do it. Your research proposal from the Martinez Scholarship will work perfectly with just a few modifications." I sat down beside her, opening my laptop to the document folder Detective Chen had prepared. "I'm a little nervous about the personal statement requirements. They want something really specific about overcoming systemic barriers in STEM education." "Oh, That's perfect for you, Victoria said, leaning over to read the screen. You have so many great examples to draw from. Growing up in a working-class family, being first-generation college, dealing with professors who underestimated you because of your background. Her enthusiasm seemed genuine, but there was something else in her tone, a subtle edge that I was only now beginning to recognize. She was cataloging my struggles, my vulnerabilities, organizing them into a narrative that emphasized my disadvantages rather than my achievements. Actually, she continued, reaching for her phone, I think I should take notes while we brainstorm. That way, we can keep track of all the key points we want to include. I nodded, though I knew that Detective Chen was already recording everything through the listening device we had placed in the room early. Victoria opened the Notes app on her phone and held it between us, her fingers poised to type. So, let's start with your family background. Your parents immigrated from Mexico, right? And your dad's construction business struggled during the recession. Well, yes, but I'm not sure I want to focus too much on the immigration story. It might come across as playing the victim card. Victoria's fingers paused over her phone screen. No, I think you should definitely include it. These diversity scholarships love that kind of narrative. The more hardship you can document, the better your chances. There it was again, the subtle steering toward a portrayal of myself as disadvantaged, rather than accomplished. But this time, I heard it clearly for what it was. Victoria wasn't helping me craft a compelling personal statement. She was encouraging me to present myself as a charity case, someone who needed assistance rather than someone who had earned recognition through merit. I've actually been thinking, I said carefully, that I want to focus more on my research achievements and leadership experience. The selection committee is probably looking for evidence of potential rather than just need. Victoria's expression flickered for just a moment, something sharp and disapproving crossing her features before she smoothed it back into supportive interest. Of course, but you don't want to come across as arrogant. Remember, there are probably going to be applicants with much more impressive credentials than yours. You need to find an angle that sets you apart. The comment stung, even though I was now aware of her strategy. Victoria had perfected the art of the backhanded encouragement, the suggestion disguised as advice that left me feeling smaller and less capable. She was undermining my confidence while appearing to help, making me doubt my own worth while positioning herself as the voice of realistic wisdom. Maybe you're right, I said, though every instinct told me otherwise. Why don't you help me outline the personal statement structure? You're always so good at organizing these things. Victoria's face brightened, and she set her phone aside to grab a pen and notepad from her purse. Absolutely. I think we should start with a hook about your childhood, something that really emphasizes the challenges you faced. Then we can build toward your academic achievements, but frame them as surprising outcomes rather than expected results. As she began sketching an outline, I found myself studying her handwriting, the careful loops and precise spacing that I had always admired. Victoria approached everything with meticulous attention to detail, whether she was planning a family gathering or apparently sabotaging my academic career. The same organizational skills that made her an effective marketing coordinator had also made her an effective saboteur. For the opening paragraph, she continued, I think you should tell the story about how you couldn't afford graphing calculators in high school math class. Remember how embarrassed you were when Mr. Peterson called attention to it in front of the whole class? I stared at her, a memory surfacing that I had almost forgotten. The graphing calculator incident had happened during my junior year of high school, and I had confided in Victoria about how humiliated I felt when the teacher asked why I was the only student without the required equipment. I had told her that story in confidence during one of our late-night conversations when she was home from college for the weekend. I'm not sure that's the image I want to lead with, I said slowly. It's pretty personal, and kind of negative. But that's exactly why it works, Victoria insisted, her pen moving quickly across the notepad. It shows vulnerability and authenticity. Scholarship committees can spot generic essay writing from a mile away. They want to see the real person behind the application. She was using my own vulnerabilities against me, mining our sisterly conversations for ammunition to craft a narrative that would diminish my accomplishments. The realization hit me like a physical blow, and I had to grip the arm of the couch to steady myself. "Are you okay?" Victoria asked, looking up from her note-taking with apparent concern. "You look a little pale." "I'm fine. Just thinking about how to structure everything." I forced a smile, though my mind was racing. If Victoria was willing to exploit the graphing calculator story, what other private moments had she catalogued for future use? How many of our intimate conversations had been data-gathering sessions disguised as sisterly bonding? My phone buzzed with a text message, and I glanced down to see Marcus's name on the screen. "Remember, you've got this. Stay strong." The message was brief, but it reminded me that I wasn't alone in this situation. Detective Chen was monitoring everything, and Marcus was waiting nearby in case I needed immediate support. "Who's texting?" Victoria asked, her tone casual but her eyes sharp with curiosity. "Just a friend from school, checking in about a group project." I set the phone aside and returned my attention to the fake application materials. "So what should we tackle next?" Victoria consulted her notes, her pen tapping against the notepad in a rhythm I recognized from childhood. She always did that when she was thinking strategically, plotting her next move in whatever game she was playing. "I think we should work on the research proposal section," she said finally. "The requirements are pretty specific, and we'll need to modify your Martinez Scholarship proposal to fit this foundation's priorities." She turned to my laptop and began scrolling through the research document I had prepared for the legitimate scholarship application. As she read, her expression grew increasingly thoughtful, and I could almost see the wheels turning in her mind. "You know, Natalie, I'm a little concerned about this research focus," she said after several minutes. "Water treatment systems for rural communities is important work, but it might be too narrow for this particular fellowship. They seem to want something with broader impact potential." I felt another flicker of anger, carefully controlled. My research proposal had taken months to develop, and had been praised by multiple faculty members for its innovation and practical applications. Victoria was trying to convince me to abandon a project that represented years of work in favor of something more generic and less personally meaningful. "I've put a lot of time into this research," I said, "and Professor Miller thinks it has real potential for publication and implementation." "Oh, I'm sure it does," Victoria replied quickly, "but you have to think about what the selection committee wants to see. They're probably looking for research that addresses multiple environmental challenges simultaneously. Your water treatment focus might seem too specialized." She was doing it again, using the language of helpful advice to plant seeds of doubt. The suggestion that my work was too specialized was particularly insidious, because it played on my own insecurities about being first-generation college and potentially not understanding the unspoken rules of academic competition. "What would you suggest instead?" I asked, though I had no intention of actually changing my research focus. Victoria's eyes lit up with the enthusiasm she always showed when she thought she was being particularly helpful. "What about something on renewable energy, solar panels, wind power, that kind of thing? It's much more mainstream, and there's a lot more funding available for that type of research." The suggestion revealed how little Victoria actually understood about my academic interests or the scholarship application process. Renewable energy research was indeed well funded, but it was also oversaturated with applicants and extremely competitive for someone at my level. More importantly, it had nothing to do with my actual expertise or passion for community-based environmental solutions. "That's an interesting idea," I said diplomatically, "but I think I want to stick with my current research focus. It's what I'm most passionate about, and I think that authenticity will come through in the application." Victoria's smile faltered slightly, and for a moment I saw something cold and calculating in her expression. "Of course, if that's what you really want. I just worry that you might be limiting your options by being too rigid about your research area." The conversation continued for another hour, with Victoria making increasingly problematic suggestions about how to modify my application material. She recommended removing references to my academic achievements, downplaying my leadership experience, and emphasizing my need for financial assistance over my qualifications for the fellowship. Each suggestion was presented as strategic advice, but the cumulative effect would have been to present me as a deserving charity case, rather than a competitive applicant. Victoria was systematically trying to sabotage my application while maintaining the appearance of being helpful and supportive. As the evening progressed, I found myself paying more attention to Victoria's methods than her specific suggestions. She was skilled at identifying my insecurities and exploiting them, using my trust in her judgment to convince me to make decisions that would undermine my own interest. When she suggested that we take a break to open the wine she had brought, I agreed gratefully. The break gave me a chance to collect my thoughts and prepare for the next phase of Detective Chen's plan. Victoria busied herself in my kitchen, opening the wine and finding glasses while keeping up a steady stream of conversation about family gossip and work updates. She seemed relaxed and comfortable, clearly confident that she was successfully steering me toward another self-sabotaged application. "You know, Nat," she said as she handed me a glass of wine, "I'm really proud of how hard you've been working on your academic goals. It takes a lot of courage to pursue graduate school when you don't have the same advantages as some of your classmates." The comment was classic Victoria, supportive on the surface but designed to remind me of my supposed disadvantages and limitations. She was positioning herself as the proud older sister while subtly reinforcing the narrative that my success was unlikely and my goals potentially unrealistic. "Thanks, Vic. I really appreciate all the help you've given me over the years." I raised my glass in what appeared to be a toast, but was actually a signal to Detective Chen that we were approaching the crucial moment of the evening. According to the plan, this was when I would mention the fake deadline issue that would give Victoria an opportunity to demonstrate her sabotage methods. Detective Chen had created a scenario where I would appear to have missed an important deadline due to a technical problem, giving Victoria a chance to help in a way that would actually make the situation worse. "Actually," I said, setting down my wine glass and picking up my phone, "I just realized something terrible. I think there might be a problem with the application submission system." Victoria immediately set down her own glass and moved closer to look at my phone screen. "What kind of problem?" "I've been trying to create an account on the Foundation's website all afternoon, but it keeps saying my email address is already associated with an existing account. I think someone might have accidentally registered using my information." I showed her the fake error message Detective Chen had created, complete with realistic-looking website formatting and technical language. Victoria studied the screen intently, her expression shifting from concern to something that looked almost like satisfaction. "Oh no, that's really frustrating," she said, though her tone suggested she wasn't surprised by the problem. "Have you tried contacting their technical support?" "I called earlier, but they said it could take several business days to resolve account conflict. With the deadline being so tight, I'm worried I might miss the application window entirely." Victoria nodded sympathetically, but I could see her mind working behind her eye. This was exactly the kind of problem she had probably created for me before, using her technical skills and attention to detail to sabotage my applications in ways that would appear to be innocent mistakes or system failures. "You know what?" she said finally. "I might be able to help with this. I deal with a lot of website registration issues at work. Sometimes these systems have workarounds that aren't obvious to regular users." She held out her hand for my phone, and I hesitated for just a moment before handing it over. This was the moment Detective Chen had been waiting for, the chance to catch Victoria in the act of actively sabotaging my academic opportunities. Victoria's fingers moved quickly over my phone screen, navigating through what appeared to be troubleshooting steps, but I noticed that she was also accessing my email app and making changes to settings that had nothing to do with the scholarship application problem. "It looks like the issue might be related to your email forwarding settings," she said, not looking up from the phone. "Sometimes scholarship websites get confused when emails are being automatically redirected." She was lying. I could see the screen well enough to know that she was actually setting up email filters that would automatically delete messages from the fake foundation. If this had been a real scholarship opportunity, Victoria's help would have ensured that I never received important communications about my application status. "There," she said finally, handing the phone back to me with a satisfied smile. "I've cleared up the conflicting settings. You should be able to create an account now without any problems." I thanked her and pretended to test the application website, though I knew the fake error message would continue to appear regardless of what Victoria had done. The important thing was that Detective Chen had captured everything on the listening devices we had placed throughout the apartment. As Victoria gathered her things to leave, she gave me another hug and reminded me to call if I had any other problems with the application. "I'm always here to help, you know that," she said. "We're sisters. We look out for each other." The words felt like acid in my ears, but I managed to smile and thank her for all her assistance. After she left, I sat alone in my living room for several minutes, processing what had just happened. The woman who had helped raise me, who had been my closest confidant and ally for most of my life, had just attempted to sabotage another academic opportunity while pretending to be supportive. My phone rang, and I saw Detective Chen's number on the caller ID. "We got everything," she said without preamble. The email manipulation, the false troubleshooting, even her reaction to the fake error message. She clearly knew exactly what type of problem you were describing because she's created similar problems before. The next morning brought a clarity I hadn't experienced in years. Detective Chen had spent the night analyzing the evidence we had gathered, cross-referencing it with the patterns of interference in my previous application. The picture that emerged was of systematic, long-term sabotage dating back to my high school college applications. Victoria had been careful, subtle, and strategic in her interference. She had never done anything dramatic enough to be easily detected, instead creating small problems that would appear to be bad luck or technical difficulties. A missed deadline here, a corrupted file there, an email that never arrived, a registration that mysteriously failed. But taken together, the pattern was unmistakable. Victoria had been actively working to limit my academic and professional opportunities for nearly a decade, all while maintaining the facade of being a supportive older sister. Detective Chen called that morning with news that would change everything. "We've traced the IP address from your fake scholarship interview," she said. "The person who impersonated Dr. Thompson and the other faculty members used a computer registered to Victoria Rodriguez. She didn't just manipulate your current applications, Natalie. She created an entire fake university experience to convince you that you had already failed." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. The elaborate charade in the conference room, the convincing impersonation of Marcus, the detailed questions about my research, all of it had been Victoria's creation. She had studied my husband's mannerisms and speech patterns well enough to fool me completely. She had researched the scholarship program thoroughly enough to create a realistic simulation. She had put enormous time and effort into making me believe I had already lost an opportunity that was still available to me. As I prepared for the real Martinez Memorial Scholarship interview, which was still 2 weeks away, I felt a mixture of anger and liberation. The anger was for all the opportunities Victoria had stolen from me, all the dreams she had convinced me to abandon, all the self-doubt she had planted in my mind over the years. But the liberation was stronger. For the first time in my adult life, I understood that my struggles and setbacks weren't due to my own inadequacies or bad luck. I had been fighting an invisible opponent who knew all my weaknesses and had unlimited access to my life. Now that the game was finally visible, I could play to win. The real Martinez Memorial Scholarship interview took place on a Tuesday morning that dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of perfect Arizona weather that made the desert feel like paradise. I woke up in Marcus's apartment, feeling more centered and prepared than I had for any academic challenge in my life. The past 2 weeks had been a whirlwind of legal consultations, evidence gathering, and careful planning, but they had also been liberating in ways I was still processing. Detective Chen had worked with the university's legal team to build a comprehensive case against Victoria, documenting not just the recent scholarship interference, but years of systematic sabotage that constituted fraud, identity theft, and harassment. The evidence was overwhelming, from IP address logs showing unauthorized access to my accounts, to recorded conversations where Victoria inadvertently revealed knowledge she shouldn't have possessed about scholarship procedures and deadlines. More importantly, the investigation had uncovered the full scope of Victoria's interference with my academic career. Working with university IT specialist, Detective Chen had traced deleted emails, recovered modified documents, and identified dozens of instances where Victoria had intercepted important communications or altered application materials without my knowledge. The picture that emerged was of someone who had dedicated enormous time and energy to limiting my opportunities while maintaining the appearance of being supportive. Marcus had been incredible throughout the investigation, balancing his roles as my husband and as a university administrator, with careful attention to ethical boundaries. He had recused himself from any decisions about Victoria's case, and had worked closely with the legal team to ensure that our personal relationship didn't compromise the integrity of the scholarship process. But he had also been my anchor during the emotional turmoil of discovering that someone I trusted had been actively working against me for years. As I dressed for the interview in a charcoal gray suit that made me feel professional and confident, I reflected on how different this experience felt from the fake interview Victoria had orchestrated. This time I knew exactly where I was going and who I would be meeting. I had confirmed every detail independently and had backup plans for potential complications. Most importantly, I was approaching the interview as myself, without the filter of Victoria's manipulations and doubt-inducing suggestions. The drive to campus felt symbolic, like I was finally traveling toward opportunities rather than away from them. For years I had approached important academic moments with a sense of inevitable disappointment, conditioned by Victoria's subtle messaging that my goals were probably unrealistic, and my preparation probably inadequate. But now I understood that those feelings weren't based on reality. They were the result of psychological manipulation designed to keep me from reaching my full potential. I arrived at the administration building 30 minutes early and spent the time reviewing my research proposal in the lobby. The document felt solid and compelling in a way that my previous academic work often hadn't, and I realized that was because I had developed it without Victoria's input. When left to my own judgment and instincts, I created work that reflected my actual abilities and interests, rather than a watered-down version designed to manage others' expectations. At exactly 10 o'clock, Diana Price called my name from the reception desk. The real Diana Price, who had returned from her vacation and been briefed on the impersonation that had occurred during her absence. She led me through the familiar hallways to a conference room I had never actually seen before, despite Victoria's elaborate simulation. The interview panel was smaller than I had expected, consisting of Dr. Thompson, Professor Miller, and Dr. Angela Vasquez from the Environmental Engineering Department. Marcus looked professional and slightly formal in his dark blue suit, maintaining the careful neutrality he had practiced during our mock interview sessions at home. But when he introduced me to the panel, I caught a brief flash of pride in his eyes that reminded me I had allies in this process. "Miss Rodriguez, thank you for joining us today," Dr. Thompson began, his voice carrying the authority that came naturally to him in administrative settings. "We've reviewed your application materials extensively and we're impressed by the depth and scope of your research proposal. This interview gives us an opportunity to understand your motivations and assess your readiness for graduate-level research." The questions that followed were rigorous but fair, covering everything from technical methodology to broader implications for environmental policy. Unlike the fake interview Victoria had constructed, these questions felt genuinely designed to evaluate my knowledge and capabilities rather than to create a realistic simulation. The panel members built on each other's inquiries, creating a comprehensive discussion that allowed me to demonstrate different aspects of my expertise. When Professor Miller asked about the community engagement component of my research, I found myself speaking passionately about the families in South Phoenix who had inspired my work. I described the grandmother who had shown me her family's improvised water filtration system, built from household materials because the municipal supply was unreliable. I talked about the teenage girl who had helped me test prototypes after school, her curiosity about the science behind water purification matching my own enthusiasm for finding practical solutions. Dr. Vasquez followed up with questions about scalability and funding, and I was able to discuss specific partnerships I had begun developing with local nonprofits and community health centers. The research wasn't just theoretical for me, it was deeply connected to real people facing real challenges, and that connection had driven me to develop solutions that were both scientifically sound and practically implementable. As the interview progressed, I felt increasingly confident and articulate. This was the academic conversation I had been preparing for my entire college career, the opportunity to discuss my work with experts who understood its significance and potential impact. Without Victoria's voice in my head questioning whether my ideas were too ambitious or my background too limited, I was able to represent myself authentically and completely. Dr. Thompson asked the final question, one that seemed designed to assess my resilience and self-awareness. Ms. Rodriguez, graduate school and research careers involve significant challenges and setbacks. Can you describe a time when you faced substantial obstacles and how you overcame them? I paused for a moment, considering how to respond. 2 weeks earlier, I might have focused on external challenges like financial constraints or academic competition, but the recent investigation had given me a different perspective on obstacles and resilience. The most significant challenge I faced, I began carefully, was learning to trust my own judgment and capabilities when others suggested that my goals might be unrealistic. There have been people in my life who, whether intentionally or not, encouraged me to scale back my ambitions or question my readiness for advanced academic work. I could see Dr. Thompson leaning forward slightly, his expression attentive. The most important lesson I've learned is that not all advice is given in good faith, and that sometimes the people who claim to be protecting you from disappointment are actually limiting your potential. Learning to distinguish between constructive feedback and subtle discouragement has been crucial for my academic development. Professor Miller nodded approvingly, and Dr. Vasquez made a note on her evaluation form. The question had given me an opportunity to demonstrate self-awareness and growth without directly referencing the situation with Victoria, and I felt that my answer had resonated with the panel. As the interview concluded, Thompson explained that scholarship decisions would be announced within 1 week, and that all candidates would be notified via email. He thanked me for my time and mentioned that the quality of applicants this year had been exceptional, making the selection process particularly challenging. Walking out of the administration building, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with winning or losing the scholarship. I had finally experienced what it felt like to compete on a level playing field, to present my work without sabotage or manipulation, to be evaluated solely on my actual merits and capabilities. Whatever the outcome, I knew I had given my best effort and represented myself honestly. Marcus met me for lunch at a small cafe near campus, and over sandwiches and iced tea, I recounted the interview experience. He listened carefully, asking thoughtful questions about the panel's responses, and offering insights into the university's decision-making process without crossing ethical boundaries. "How do you feel?" he asked as we finished our meal. "Free," I said, surprising myself with the simplicity and certainty of the answer. "For the first time in years, I feel like I'm competing in a game where I know the rules and can trust that the playing field is level." That afternoon brought a call from Detective Chen with an update on Victoria's case. The university had decided to pursue both criminal charges and civil penalties, recognizing that the elaborate nature of Victoria's deception went far beyond simple sibling rivalry. The fake scholarship interview alone had required sophisticated planning and resources, representing a clear case of fraud and impersonation. "We've also identified several other students who may have been victims of similar interference," Detective Chen explained. "Your sister appears to have targeted other scholarship applicants over the years, using information gleaned from her work connections and social networks to identify and sabotage potential competitors." The revelation that Victoria's sabotage extended beyond our family was both shocking and clarifying. Her behavior wasn't driven by protective sisterly concern or even simple jealousy. It was a pattern of calculated interference designed to limit opportunities for people she perceived as threats to her own status or success. Detective Chen also informed me that Victoria had been attempting to contact me through various channels since our confrontation, leaving voicemails and sending emails that alternated between apologies and accusations. "She's claiming that everything she did was meant to protect you from disappointment and failure," Detective Chen said. "It's a common justification among people who engage in this type of manipulative behavior." I asked Detective Chen not to forward any of Victoria's messages to me. Whatever explanations or justifications she might offer,
they couldn't change the fundamental fact that she had violated my trust and actively worked to undermine my academic career for years. The time for family reconciliation had passed the moment she decided to impersonate university officials and create elaborate deceptions designed to convince me I had failed. The week between the interview and the scholarship announcement passed quickly, filled with final exams and research deadlines that kept me too busy to obsess over the outcome. I found myself approaching academic challenges with a new confidence, no longer second-guessing my abilities or seeking validation from people whose judgment I couldn't trust. Marcus and I spent the evenings planning our summer research trip to rural Arizona communities, where I would begin the preliminary work for my graduate thesis regardless of the scholarship outcome. We mapped out potential field sites, identified key stakeholders, and developed protocols for community engagement that would ensure our research served local needs, rather than just academic interests. On Friday afternoon, exactly 1 week after the interview, the email arrived. I was in the library working on a final paper when my phone buzzed with a message from the Southwest State University's Scholarship Committee. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the email, aware that this moment represented more than just financial aid. It was validation that I could succeed when allowed to compete fairly. Dear Ms. Rodriguez, we are pleased to inform you that you have been selected as this year's recipient of the Martinez Memorial Scholarship. Your research proposal and interview demonstrated exceptional promise, and we are excited to support your graduate studies and community-focused research. The scholarship includes full tuition coverage, a research stipend, and funding for fieldwork expenses. We look forward to working with you as you pursue your master's degree in environmental engineering. Congratulations on this well-deserved recognition. Sincerely, Dr. Marcus Thompson, Dean of Engineering. I read the email 3 times before the reality sank in. Not only had I won the scholarship, but I had done so based entirely on my own merits, without any interference or manipulation from Victoria. The victory felt clean and complete in a way that previous successes never had, because I knew it reflected my actual capabilities rather than a diluted version shaped by someone else's insecurity. The celebration that evening was small and intimate, just Marcus and me at our favorite restaurant overlooking the Phoenix skyline. As we toasted with champagne and watched the sunset paint the desert mountains in shades of gold and purple, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the circuitous path that had led to this moment. I keep thinking about all the opportunities Victoria stole from me over the years, I said as we shared dessert. All the scholarships I didn't get, the programs I was rejected from, the dreams I abandoned because I thought I wasn't good enough. Marcus reached across the table and squeezed my hand.
You can't change the past, but you can make sure it doesn't define your future. Victoria's sabotage revealed something important about your character. Even with someone actively working against you, you persevered. You kept pursuing your goals despite facing obstacles that would have discouraged many people. He was right, and that perspective helped me process the complex emotions I felt about Victoria's betrayal. Yes, she had stolen opportunities and wasted years of my potential, but she had also inadvertently demonstrated my resilience and determination. The fact that I had continued pursuing academic excellence, despite her interference, proved that my commitment to learning and research was genuine and unshakable. The legal proceedings against Victoria moved forward over the following weeks, but I tried to focus my attention on the future rather than dwelling on past grievances. The scholarship would allow me to pursue graduate school without financial stress, conducting research that could make a meaningful difference in communities that had been overlooked by traditional academic institutions. I also began receiving calls from other students who had experienced similar sabotage, people who had discovered Victoria's interference through the university's investigation. Some were pursuing their own legal action, while others simply wanted to understand what had happened to their academic careers. The conversations were difficult but healing, creating a community of people who had survived manipulation and were reclaiming their potential. One particularly meaningful call came from a woman named Jennifer Torres, who had been Victoria's roommate during their sophomore year of college. Jennifer had experienced a series of academic setbacks that year, including missed deadlines and corrupted computer files that had nearly cost her a scholarship renewal. I always suspected that Victoria was involved somehow, Jennifer told me. She was too helpful, too eager to assist with important deadlines, and she always seemed to know about problems before I discovered them myself. But I could never prove anything, and accusing your roommate of sabotage seemed paranoid. Jennifer's story helped me understand that Victoria's behavior was part of a long-established pattern, not a recent development triggered by my academic success. She had been systematically undermining potential competitors for years, using her technical skills and social connections to create obstacles that appeared to be random misfortune. The most disturbing aspect of Victoria's behavior was how she had weaponized family relationships and trust to achieve her goals. She had exploited my love and respect for her to gain access to my personal information and academic plans. She had used our parents' pride in both their daughters to position herself as the helpful older sister, while secretly working to ensure that I never achieved comparable success. But perhaps the most insidious element of Victoria's sabotage was how she had convinced me to doubt my own abilities and judgment. By consistently suggesting that my goals were unrealistic and my preparation inadequate, she had created a psychological environment where failure seemed inevitable, and success felt like a lucky accident rather than earned recognition. Understanding the full scope of Victoria's manipulation was painful but ultimately liberating. It allowed me to reinterpret my academic history and recognize that many of my supposed shortcomings were actually evidence of her interference. The missed deadlines, the technical problems, the moments of self-doubt that had derailed important opportunities, all of them made sense when viewed as part of a deliberate campaign of sabotage. As I prepared to start graduate school with the Martinez Memorial Scholarship, I felt like I was finally meeting my authentic self for the first time. Without Victoria's influence shaping my decisions and undermining my confidence, I could pursue my research with the full force of my abilities and passion. The water treatment project that had initially seemed too ambitious now felt achievable and important, worthy of the years of work it would require. The desert landscape around Phoenix had always appealed to me because of its harsh beauty and hidden resilience. Plants and animals that appeared fragile actually possessed extraordinary adaptations that allowed them to thrive in challenging conditions. Now I understood that I had developed similar adaptations, psychological and emotional strategies that had helped me survive and eventually overcome Victoria's sabotage. The scholarship announcement also prompted conversations with my parents about Victoria's behavior and our family dynamic. Initially, they struggled to believe that their older daughter had systematically undermined their younger daughter's academic career. But as Detective Chen shared evidence and other victims came forward, they began to recognize patterns they had previously dismissed as coincidence or bad luck. My mother's response was particularly heartbreaking, as she realized that her pride in Victoria's helpfulness had inadvertently enabled the sabotage. "She was always so eager to help with your applications and paperwork," Carmen said during a difficult family dinner. "I thought it showed how much she cared about your success. I never imagined she was working against you." My father's reaction was more direct and angry, reflecting his straightforward approach to problems and relationships. "Family is supposed to build each other up, not tear each other down," Eduardo said. "What Victoria did goes against everything we tried to teach you girls about loyalty and support." The family conversations were painful but necessary, helping us all understand how Victoria had manipulated our relationships and exploited our trust. They also marked the beginning of a healing process that would take time but that felt essential for moving forward with authenticity and integrity. As the spring semester ended and summer research season approached, I found myself looking forward to the future with an optimism I hadn't felt in years. The Martinez Memorial Scholarship would fund not just my graduate education, but also community-based research that could improve water access for families throughout the Southwest. Victoria's sabotage had delayed my progress, but hadn't changed my fundamental commitment to using science and engineering to address environmental justice issues. The investigation into Victoria's behavior was nearing its conclusion, with criminal charges pending and civil penalties being determined. But for me, the most important outcome had already been achieved. I finally understood the true source of the obstacles I had faced, and I was free to pursue my goals without the psychological burden of self-doubt and manufactured limitations that Victoria had imposed on my thinking. Standing in my apartment that overlooked downtown Phoenix, surrounded by graduate school acceptance letters and research proposals that reflected my actual interest and abilities, I felt a profound sense of possibility. The future stretched ahead of me like the desert highways I had traveled as a child, long and straight and full of potential for discovery and growth. Victoria had tried to convince me that my dreams were too big and my capabilities too limited, but her elaborate sabotage had actually proven the opposite. The amount of effort she had invested in undermining my success demonstrated that she recognized my potential even when I had been convinced to doubt it myself. Now, with the truth finally revealed and justice being pursued, I was ready to find out just how far that potential could take me. The courthouse in downtown Phoenix buzzed with quiet activity on the morning of Victoria's sentencing hearing, 6 months after her arrest. I sat in the gallery wearing a simple navy dress, my hands folded calmly in my lap as I watched my sister's legal team present their final arguments for leniency. Victoria looked smaller than I remembered, her usually perfect hair pulled back severely and her designer clothes replaced by a conservative gray suit that seemed to drain the color from her face. She had eventually pled guilty to multiple counts of fraud, identity theft and computer crimes after Detective Chen's investigation revealed the staggering scope of her sabotage operation. The evidence was overwhelming, from doctored emails to fake university communications, spanning nearly 8 years and affecting dozens of scholarship applicants across multiple universities. Victoria hadn't just targeted me, she had systematically undermined anyone she perceived as competition, in academic or professional circles. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Margaret Holloway, reviewed the case file with careful attention to detail. Rodriguez, she addressed Victoria directly, your actions represent a particularly troubling form of fraud, because they exploited family relationships and educational institutions to achieve personal gain. You violated the trust of your sister, your family, and numerous academic communities. Victoria's lawyer had argued for probation and community service, emphasizing her previously clean record and the psychological factors that had contributed to her behavior. But the prosecution had presented compelling evidence that Victoria's crimes were calculated and persistent, requiring sophisticated planning and technical expertise. She hadn't acted impulsively or out of momentary jealousy. She had built an elaborate system designed to limit other people's opportunities, while maintaining her own competitive advantages. As I listened to the proceedings, I felt surprisingly little anger toward Victoria. The intense rage and betrayal I had experienced during the investigation had gradually transformed into something closer to sadness and disappointment. The woman sitting at the defendant's table was still my sister, but she was also someone who had chosen to prioritize her own insecurities over our family bonds and basic ethical principles. Judge Holloway announced a sentence of 18 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation, along with restitution payments to the universities and individuals affected by Victoria's fraud. The sentence was substantial but not devastating, reflecting both the seriousness of her crimes and her eventual cooperation with the investigation. After the hearing, I walked out of the courthouse into the brilliant Arizona sunshine, feeling a sense of closure that had been months in the making. Marcus waited for me by his car, looking handsome and professional in his charcoal suit. We didn't speak immediately, just stood together in the parking lot as the weight of the morning's events settled around us. "How are you doing?" he asked finally, his voice gentle but relieved, I said, surprising myself with the honesty of the response. I thought I'd feel more vindicated or triumphant, but mainly I just feel like this chapter of my life is finally over. The past 6 months had been transformative in ways I was still processing. Graduate school had challenged me intellectually and creatively, pushing me to develop research skills and theoretical frameworks that felt genuinely exciting. Without Victoria's voice in my head, questioning my capabilities or suggesting that my goals were unrealistic, I had thrown myself into academic work with an enthusiasm that reminded me why I had fallen in love with environmental engineering in the first place. My research on decentralized water treatment systems had evolved beyond my initial proposal, incorporating community feedback and addressing implementation challenges that I hadn't anticipated during the scholarship application process. Working directly with families in rural Arizona had taught me lessons about practical problem solving that no classroom could provide, and it had also reinforced my commitment to research that served real-world needs, rather than just academic interest. The Martinez Memorial Scholarship had provided more than financial support. It had connected me with a network of faculty members and graduate students
who shared my passion for environmental justice and community-based solutions. Alina Martinez herself, now in her 70s but still actively engaged in environmental policy work, had become an informal mentor who helped me navigate the complexities of academic research while maintaining focus on practical application. Perhaps most importantly, the scholarship had validated my belief that academic success was possible when I trusted my own judgment and pursued my authentic interest. The confidence I had gained from winning the competition fairly had carried over into other aspects of my graduate work, from presenting research at conferences to collaborating with faculty members on grant applications. Marcus and I drove to Papago Park for a picnic lunch, spreading a blanket near the distinctive red sandstone formations that gave the desert landscape its otherworldly beauty. As we unpacked sandwiches and fruit, I found myself reflecting on how much my relationship with him had deepened through the challenges of the past year. During the investigation and legal proceedings, Marcus had been careful to maintain appropriate professional boundaries while still providing personal support. He had recused himself from any university decisions related to Victoria's case, and had worked with legal counsel to ensure that our marriage didn't create conflicts of interest in the scholarship process. But he had also been my emotional anchor during the most difficult moments, helping me process the betrayal and rebuild my sense of self-worth. "I've been thinking about Victoria's sentencing," I said as we watched a hawk circle overhead, riding the desert thermals with effortless grace. "Part of me feels guilty for not feeling more upset about her going to prison." Marcus considered this as he peeled an orange, the citrus scent sharp and clean in the dry air. "I think what you're experiencing is healthy detachment. You've processed the betrayal and moved on with your life. Victoria's consequences are the result of her own choices, not something you inflicted on her." He was right, though it had taken months of therapy and self-reflection to reach that understanding. In the immediate aftermath of discovering Victoria's sabotage, I had been consumed by anger and a desire for revenge. But as the legal system took over and I became absorbed in graduate school, those intense emotions had gradually faded into something more manageable. The therapy had been particularly helpful in understanding the psychological dynamics that had allowed Victoria's manipulation to continue for so long. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a family counselor who specialized in sibling relationships and academic pressure, had helped me recognize the subtle ways that Victoria had conditioned me to doubt my own perceptions and capabilities. Gaslighting within families is particularly insidious, Dr. Martinez had explained during one of our sessions, because it exploits the natural trust and vulnerability that exist between relatives. Victoria didn't just sabotage your applications, she systematically undermined your confidence in your own judgment. Understanding the psychological component of Victoria's behavior had been crucial for my recovery and growth. It had helped me recognize that my struggles with self-doubt and imposter syndrome weren't character flaws or realistic assessments of my limitations. They were the predictable results of years of subtle manipulation designed to keep me from reaching my full potential. The afternoon sun was beginning to slant toward the western horizon when my phone buzzed with a text message from Professor Miller. "Congratulations, NSF grant approved. Ready to change the world?" The message was followed by a champagne bottle emoji and a link to the National Science Foundation announcement. I stared at the screen for several seconds before the reality sank in. The grant proposal I had submitted 3 months earlier, requesting funding for a comprehensive study of community-based water treatment systems across the Southwest, had been approved. The award would fund 3 years of research, including fieldwork, equipment purchases, and support for undergraduate research assistants. Marcus read the message over my shoulder and let out a whoop of celebration that startled a roadrunner foraging nearby. "Natalie, this is incredible. Do you realize what this means?" I did realize, though it felt almost too good to be true. The NSF grant would establish me as a serious researcher in my field while still a graduate student, providing opportunities for publication and professional development that typically came much later in academic career. More importantly, it would allow me to conduct research that could genuinely improve water access and quality for communities that had been marginalized by traditional infrastructure development. As we packed up our picnic and prepared to head home, I thought about calling my parents to share the news. My relationship with them had evolved significantly since Victoria's arrest, marked by difficult conversations about family dynamics and painful acknowledgments of how her manipulation had affected all of us. My mother had been particularly devastated by the revelation that her older daughter had been systematically undermining her younger daughter's success. Carmen had always prided herself on raising children who supported each other, and discovering that Victoria had violated that fundamental family value had shaken her understanding of her own parenting. "I keep thinking about all the times Victoria offered to help with your applications," she had said during one of our family dinners. "I was so proud of how caring she seemed, how invested she was in your success. I never imagined that she was actually working against you." My father's response had been more direct but equally painful. Eduardo had built his construction business on principles of honesty and reliability, and Victoria's elaborate deceptions violated everything he believed about integrity and family loyalty. He had struggled to reconcile his love for his older daughter with his anger about her betrayal of family trust. The conversations with my parents had been difficult but healing, helping all of us understand how Victoria had exploited our natural family bonds to achieve her manipulative goals. They had also marked the beginning of a rebuilding process that emphasized open communication and authentic support rather than the performance of family harmony that Victoria had orchestrated for years. That evening, Marcus and I celebrated the NSF grant approval at a small restaurant in Old Town Scottsdale, surrounded by the warmth of adobe walls and the gentle sound of mariachi music. As we toasted with margaritas and shared enchiladas, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought me to this moment. "You know what's amazing?" I said as we finished dinner. 2 years ago, I was so convinced that I wasn't smart enough or qualified enough for competitive grants like this. Victoria had me believing that I should be grateful for any opportunity, no matter how small. Marcus raised his glass again. "And now you're going to be leading research that could impact thousands of families across the Southwest. Victoria's sabotage delayed your progress, but it couldn't destroy your actual potential." The drive home took us through downtown Phoenix, past the university campus, where I had experienced both the fake scholarship interview and the real one. The contrast between those two experiences had taught me valuable lessons about trust, authenticity, and the importance of verifying information independently rather than accepting others' interpretations of reality. As we passed the administration building where Marcus worked, I thought about how our relationship had navigated the complex intersection of personal and professional boundaries. His role as Dean of Engineering had required careful ethical considerations throughout the scholarship process and Victoria's investigation, but it had also provided him with unique insights into academic politics and institutional dynamics. "I have a confession," Marcus said as we pulled into our driveway. "When I first met you in Professor Williams' environmental policy seminar, I was intimidated by how passionate and knowledgeable you were about water justice issues. I couldn't understand why you seemed so uncertain about your abilities when you were clearly one of the strongest students in the program." The admission surprised me, though it also made sense in retrospect. Victoria's psychological manipulation had been so effective that even my obvious academic strengths had been filtered through a lens of self-doubt and imposter syndrome. I had consistently underestimated my own capabilities while overestimating the challenges I faced. Our house felt peaceful and welcoming as we settled in for the evening, surrounded by the books and research materials that reflected my authentic academic interest. The walls were decorated with photos from my fieldwork in rural Arizona communities, images of families who had collaborated with my research and benefited from improved water access. One photo showed me working with a group of teenagers in a small town near the Mexico border, all of us crowded around a prototype water purification system we had built together. The kids' excitement about the science behind the technology matched my own enthusiasm for finding practical solutions to environmental challenges. Looking at that image, I could see clearly who I was when freed from Victoria's influence, a researcher who thrived on collaboration and community engagement. The legal settlement with Victoria had included restitution payments that would help fund additional research equipment and community outreach programs. More symbolically, it had also included a written acknowledgement of the harm her actions had caused, both to me personally and to the academic institutions she had deceived. Victoria's letter of apology had been legally mandated rather than personally motivated, filled with language that her attorney had clearly crafted to minimize liability rather than express genuine remorse. But reading it had still provided a form of closure, official recognition that her behavior had been wrong and that its effects on my academic career had been substantial. The evening news carried a brief story about academic fraud cases and the increasing sophistication of schemes designed to manipulate scholarship and admissions process. Victoria's case was mentioned as an example of how family relationships could be weaponized to commit fraud, though the report didn't include our names or specific details about her method. Watching the news coverage reminded me that Victoria's behavior was part of a broader pattern of academic dishonesty that affected institutions across the country. Her case had prompted Southwest State University to implement new security measures for scholarship applications and to provide training for staff members on identifying potential fraud. As I prepared for bed that night, I reflected on how completely my life had changed since the morning I had received the fake scholarship rejection email. The past year had included the highest highs and lowest lows of my academic career, from the devastating discovery of Victoria's betrayal to the triumph of winning legitimate recognition for my research ability. But perhaps the most significant change had been internal, the gradual rebuilding of confidence in my own judgment and capabilities. Victoria's manipulation had convinced me that my academic success was largely due to luck or lowered standards rather than genuine merit. Now I understood that my achievements reflected years of hard work, intellectual curiosity, and authentic passion for environmental justice. The NSF grant approval felt like the final piece of evidence that I belonged in competitive academic circles, that my research was valued by experts in the field, and that my career goals were realistic rather than grandiose fantasy. Victoria had tried to convince me that I was reaching above my station, but the grant proved that my ambitions were appropriate for someone with my skills and dedication. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought about the water treatment systems that would be built with NSF funding, the communities that would benefit from improved access to clean water, and the undergraduate students who would gain research experience working on the project. Victoria's sabotage had been motivated by her own insecurities and competitive instincts, but the ultimate result had been to make me more resilient, more determined, and more committed to using my abilities in service of others. The desert night was quiet and cool, with stars visible despite the city lights. Through my bedroom window I could see the distant outline of Camelback Mountain, the iconic formation that had guided travelers across this landscape for centuries. Like those travelers, I had finally found my way after a long journey through uncertain terrain, and the path ahead looked clear and full of promise. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, graduate courses to complete and research protocols to develop. But tonight, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing you've overcome significant obstacles through persistence and integrity. Victoria had tried to write the story of my academic career, but in the end, I had reclaimed the pen and written my own ending. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.